Empower Radio presents Simple Steps, Real Change with Cheryl Maloney and Kenny Brixey. You'll find inspiration, support, and simple steps to help you on the path to a better life. Simple steps lead to real change. Here are your hosts, Cheryl Maloney and Kenny Brixey.
Have you ever tried to just melt into the background thinking your story just absolutely does not matter? Have you ever kept quiet because you thought no one would want to hear about your experience? Have you ever felt like just throwing in the towel because your life situation has become just too much to handle? Well, we've got good news for you. Your story matters. And let me repeat this. Be sure you hear it. Your story matters. Tonight's guest is an amazing inspirational speaker, author, radio show producer, and personality, as well as the creator of her own organization called Your Story Matters. Hi, this is Kenny, and I'm here tonight with Cheryl Maloney. How are you doing tonight, Cheryl?
Hey, Kenny, I'm doing fabulous. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm trying to still adapt to this time change, and it's kind of cool to be sitting here in the daylight. This is the first time I've been able to do the show, and it's still daylight out, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it always takes me a few days to adjust as well.
Oh, we're working on it. Well, I know how excited we both are about tonight's show, but before we get started, I just want to, again, give a shout-out to Brent Carey. Brent's the CEO of Empower Radio, and without him, we would not be here, besides the fact that Brent is just the most wonderful person and my mentor. So, Brent, thank you for allowing us to do this. And behind the scene is Steve Klein and Bob Wittersheim, our producers that are keeping us, on schedule and on time and being able to hear us. So for those of you listening, if you would like to call in with a question for our guest tonight, the phone number is 248-809-3474. Again, 248-809-3474. And for those of you that just don't want to hear your voice on the radio, remember you can always email a question in to simplesteps@me.com. Again, simplesteps@me.com. So, Kenny, back to you.
All right. Well, tonight we have a wonderful guest. She is the author of books with many more to come. She delivers inspirational speeches. She's the creator of the radio show Your Story Matters, and she shares her amazing story and ultimately has created a platform for others to share their story, which in turn, and we'll find out more about this tonight, helps many, many more people. It's kind of a ripple effect that's just absolutely beautiful. Her efforts have become a global work and continue to connect people from all walks of life with each other as support, as counsel, and simply as loving ears, just somebody to support them and rely on. She has an amazing story of her own and defines what it truly means to be a role model. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce you to our new friend, Angela Schaefers. Welcome, Angela. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you, Kenny. I'm doing great, and thank you, Cheryl. I'm so happy to be here on the show with you guys tonight and to share some of the things that I've learned along my journey and to talk with your listeners about some amazing stuff that hopefully will help encourage and inspire them about their story.
Well, wonderful, Angela. We're thrilled to have you here. I remember sitting across this mic with you as you told my story or allowed me to tell my story a few weeks back. So why don't we kick this off a little bit tonight? Tell us about your story and how you created Your Story Matters. So it kind of both goes together. Give our audience a little bit of your background.
Well, I mentioned to you earlier, and I know it's on my website, so you know some of this, but I'll share with the listeners that I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer approximately 9 years ago. And at that time, my prognosis was not good. They said I wouldn't have long to live, but I didn't have an exact time frame. And I had 3 young children and wanted to make sure that if I wasn't here, that they would understand where I had been in my own life and how I had become who I had from my experiences. So I wrote down my story, and I had put it into book format, but was certainly not interested in sharing it publicly or putting it out there to anyone other than my close friends and family. And a friend encouraged me to share it with others. She said that it would be encouraging to a lot of people and inspirational to them. And it was really hard for me because I thought, this is my personal stuff. I don't want to share all this. I didn't want it to be public, but I felt like maybe she was, had a point there, and I really wanted to do something that was meaningful. So long story short, I ended up printing the book, selling all the copies via word of mouth, going out and speaking to groups and churches and things like that. And I really learned during that time that people were encouraged and inspired by hearing things that I had overcome, hearing about things that I had endured, and really feeling connected to me because they thought perhaps nobody else had been through some of the things that they've gone through that I had gone through.
And isn't that amazing? I know I've found that since starting Simple Steps is people feel that they're alone in their journeys. And your story in particular, because you've been battling cancer for a long period of time. And you've now done that pretty much in the public eye to help other people.
Yes, and it hasn't always been easy, I will say that, but it's been very worth it because anytime that someone tells me, whether it's my story or someone's story that I've shared on the show, including your own, that they've been encouraged or inspired or it gave them hope, or other people who message me and say, I decided to get help for my addiction, or I decided to find a shelter because I've been being abused, I've been suffering through domestic violence. That is what makes it worth it, despite whatever I'm going through or the challenges during these past 9 years. And even before that, it was just, there's sometimes life happens and there's struggles. But when you look at the potential of the good that you can do, that's really powerful to me.
Now, Angela, you had told us earlier that you have not been cleared of this cancer. You still are fighting this battle. How has telling your story helped you with this battle, and how has it helped you in your life over these 9 years? Because that's a very tough battle that you've been waging there.
Well, I think that it's really helped me personally to feel like my story matters, that all the things I've gone through, the good, the bad, and the ugly, have been for a purpose. And in saying that, I know that I've gone through the healing process. I've learned from all of these things, and there's still more learning. I don't think it ever really ends. But I've been able to take that learning and share it with other people and have an impact in their life. So for me, that gives back to me something very vital, and that is living out my life purpose. This is my life purpose. Your story matters. Sharing my story, encouraging other people to share theirs. Because you mentioned earlier about the ripple effect. It's amazing what happens when we become community in the sense of really understanding and having empathy for one another and realizing that someone might appear to be one thing on the outside or appear to live a particular way, but they probably have things that they've endured or that they're even going through now that perhaps we would be able to understand them more and be closer connected to them if we knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I know because I've gone through a not quite as serious situation with Jack and with cancer, and that you find, I know we would sit in cancer wards with lots of people that were going through very similar things, and if they could talk about it and they knew that they weren't alone, no matter how tough that battle was, because there isn't anyone out there that's going to wish cancer or any other serious disease on anyone whatsoever, but I think you have literally almost hit the nail on the head, is you found meaning in this, even though it isn't what you'd wish for yourself.
Exactly. And nor are some of the other things that I've had guests on the show about, because there's obviously been some very traumatic topics, grief, addiction, suicide awareness, things like that. And those too have encouraged me, which is awesome because I can talk to other people who are not dealing with cancer or haven't dealt with that, but they've had significant situations and events in their lives that they've learned from and that they found some sort of hope. So that's kind of where we go full circle and we start to see that all of these stories are happening all the time, all over the world. And they're not limited to a gender or a race or anything else. They're about people and about the human spirit and how we are really able to adapt and survive.
Well, and there is a lot of perspective, and I think you bring a great deal of perspective, because while you're dealing with something in particular, because of what you're dealing with, you're reaching out. Like we were talking before about, you deal with a lot of folks that are running into domestic violence issues, and it's not that their body is having issues, but it may be. But you can relate to them because you've gone through the struggle that you have. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And tell me, as you're talking to folks that are, and let's just use domestic violence because that's one that you had mentioned before, what are you finding helps folks that are going through those situations as you're talking about their stories?
Well, the first thing is what you've mentioned, knowing that you're not alone, because as I'm also a counselor, and as a counselor, that's the key thing that we find in most people that come in for counseling, is that they don't feel that anyone else has gone through what they have. They don't feel that anyone could ever understand how they're feeling or what they're going through, and that's really not true. Even though your circumstances may not be exactly the same, there are people who have gone through the feelings of, if you want to use domestic violence, for instance, feeling, not worthy, feeling like they didn't matter, feeling like they were supposed to be treated badly, but they didn't understand why. So there's all these things that are entangled with situations that happen to us. And that's part of what connects people, is to help them to understand they're not alone. Some of the guests and the listeners both have shared with me that hearing other people's tips or suggestions about how they've dealt with getting out of a situation or being brave enough to go seek help at a shelter has been amazing for some people, literally life-changing, because they'll hear someone else talk about, it was hard to do it, I was terrified, I didn't know if I could go through that door or leave my house with my suitcase. And they hear these things, and it really inspires them, the person listening or on the other side of it, to do something. They get that spark of courage, I think it is, and they want to change their life and look for the better that can possibly come for them.
Well, you talk about the story is helping people be inspired to take those steps. What is it doing to their overall attitude towards their situation?
Well, I think I've heard various things, and some of it is just being encouraged and inspired to make a change. Some of it is feeling relieved. I know one lady wrote to me and she said, I'm relieved that somebody else has gone through this and understands how I feel or where I've been. Sometimes in whatever situation, there's so much humiliation related to it. And this is not even things like domestic violence or addiction. Some people who have disabilities feel humiliation. They feel like they're not, enough in the world. And then they get to hear other people talk about feeling that same way and realizing that that's not true, that they still have, value and they have something to offer the world. And it just lifts them up. It gives them a little bit of hope to say, maybe that's true for me too. If this person can deal with this way and get through the challenge that way and find success or find some sort of meaning and hope for the future in it, then I can too.
Well, and I think you said something very powerful. It is all about hope. Yes. And when we sit, and in the days where we all live behind computers and the one-on-one contact isn't as prevalent as it was when I was a child, you were a child, grandparents' age, whatever the case may be, people are looking for ways to make that connection. And by doing Your Story Matters, they are relating. Now, do you ever have any folks, and I think we were talking about this before, that actually have connected once they've heard a person's story?
Yes, I've connected a few of the listeners to some guests on the shows. A couple of them have actually developed friendships. They don't live anywhere near each other, but they're able to talk on the phone. I believe one couple of them actually met in person, which was awesome. So, yeah, it's, that's what's so amazing about our world, is that there's a gazillion people all over the world, right? But we're not often connected to those people depending on our circle and depending on the ability we have even to be online. So it's awesome when you can find someone from another country that says, I am suffering from domestic violence. I need help. I listened to someone that said it wasn't okay. And what do I do? And so connecting that person to someone here in the States who has resources, who understands what it's like to go through that and can truly walk with this person in their journey is just amazing. I mean, that's one of the huge blessings I have in my life, is being able to see that happen because of the show.
And your show now, give folks a little bit of idea, is your show now is produced on iTunes, correct? Or you produce it, it comes up on iTunes, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in any given day, just give us a flavor for the types of stories that you've run into so far.
Well, a lot of the let me just share the 3 topic areas. One is encouraging entrepreneurs, and those are entrepreneurs that have gone through whatever challenges, whether they're personal or professional or both, to become successful in whatever they're doing in their business. The other topic is encourage or inspiring hope, and that's nonprofits, sharing nonprofits in various areas, doing various things depending on, whether it's a domestic violence shelter or a cancer awareness nonprofit organization, something like that. And the other one is inspiring healing. And inspiring healing is usually people who have gone through the healing process, whether physically or emotionally, and have discovered ways to help not only themselves, but other people to do that. So I've had various people that have been physically disabled, and they've learned how to live and deal with that challenge and overcome some of that. I had one man who was hurt in an accident riding a motorcycle, and he was able to regain his strength and actually walk again, which He was told he never would. Another lady, same type of thing. She had cancer, but when she had her surgery, it affected her legs, and she was not going to be able to get out of her wheelchair for the rest of her life. And she kept training and training. She was prior a gymnastic coach, and now is able to walk and continue coaching. So those are some of the different stories. They're not all traumatic, but those are just some ideas of what we're sharing to help people to understand that, yes, things happen, and sometimes they're very traumatic and very challenging, but there is hope, and there is a way to get through it and deal with it, and sometimes completely overcome it, especially when someone else has said, no, there's no way that you can heal from this or move on.
Well, and you're really a living example of this, because you were told so many years ago that you didn't have much time to live, and it's 9 years later, and you are still relatively healthy, even though you still are going through, you still have cancer. You still have this, and are you still considered in stage 4?
Yes, they have not moved me out of that stage. I'm sure it has to do with my blood levels and different tumor markers and things like that. So, and that's a good point. I mean, that's, I don't look at myself the same way as someone who's dealt with, having to learn how to walk again and things like that. But on the other hand, I'm still here. And I think we talked about that briefly before. I attribute that to my faith and my desire to live out my life as purposely as possible each and every day. So for whatever reason, we can all call it different things, I'm still here. I'm still doing what I'm meant to do and what I'm called to do. And I believe that that will continue as long as it should, to leave behind a legacy of helping to encourage and inspire other people, not just to have hope to get through whatever, but to really realize the power of their story.
Well, and Kenny, I've got this question that's just sitting on the tip of my tongue, so I've got to ask it, because as I'm sitting here and listening to you, Angela, and I'm hoping that those that are listening are getting this message that just because we're told things won't work the way that we had hoped, that doesn't mean whoever's giving us that information knows 100%. I look at doctors and go, they're doing the best that they can. But you're a testament to the fact that your strength, your faith, your commitment, you've overcome what they said you couldn't. The folks that you were just talking about have overcome what someone said they couldn't do. And it's all in the power of will. And I will, okay, I'm going to get on a soapbox. I apologize for that. But I mean, you really tell the stories of people that have been given death sentences and sentences that have said, you're not going to walk again. And they're going, no, I'm not listening. I'm going to do what I want to do.
Exactly.
That's powerful. I mean, that just, okay, Kenny, go.
Well, that is powerful. And I think that's the whole idea, is that I don't think everyone understands completely the power of the human spirit. And if I leave any message behind in my lifetime, that's one thing that I want everyone to understand, is that the power within us is so amazing and so huge, and it's available to each of us. And that's what I'm trying to do by sharing my story and others.
Angela, there are a lot of people that will hear this that have not been through what they believe is anything traumatic. In fact, I went 15 years before I ever thought that the death of my son was a traumatic experience. But there are a lot of people that are dealing with things, but they just don't think it's that big a deal. How does their story, how can they relate to this in such a way that they can benefit from it?
Well, and that's a question I get asked often. And I've had guests on the show for sure that have not had huge traumatic things happen, but they've overcome challenges. They've overcome a divorce. They've overcome moving across the country. And in that, they found the learning in that, the potential for what could be, despite a huge change, despite feeling unhappy or being hurt. I mean, obviously, divorce is a huge thing and hurtful and a life-changing thing. So there's so many things that could happen, and there's even good things. There's people out there who, the Millionaire Fastlane author, who talked about his story of, being raised by a single mom. He didn't have a horrible life. He didn't, live off the streets or on welfare, but he talked about, not having a typical life of a mom and dad and having all the things that he had hoped to have or wanted to have. Was he homeless? No. He talked about how that affected him and how he turned that into being a successful entrepreneur and being the best person that he could be, having learned from his story. So I think there's something in all of our stories, whether they're good or bad or indifferent, that we can learn from and then share with other people. And that's one of the things I kind of hear when I am out and about, is that someone thinks somebody's story may not matter, but then they share it with someone else. Like maybe a single mom needs to hear a tip that you learned about something, and they're just excited and thrilled to have that information. Maybe another person needs to hear about your experience being in the military and how and why you did that, and it encourages and inspires them. So those are just some examples of all the amazing different things that happen within our lifetime that are part of our story.
Well, and I think that you have just made a really great point, because just because someone hasn't gone through a catastrophic loss or a catastrophic injury or something that everyone would go, oh, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy type of thing, that doesn't mean we don't all go through our own challenges. And it's a matter of perspective. If the only thing that you've ever experienced is just trying to get up in the morning because your health is so bad, that's your challenge. And maybe the other person across here has lost their legs in an accident. It's all a matter of perspective, but it's still a challenge to people. And that's one thing that I know we want to get into. We're getting close into a break here, but I know we want to talk about the difference between the healing spirit and feeling that the victim mentality, and the difference between that, because my guess is you've seen and talked to a lot of people who have come through those different experiences. And some people see themselves as a victim and others see themselves as a survivor and a thriver.
Right. Definitely true. And there's many, many stories out there varying from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Well, and just give us a flavor. How many people have you interviewed?
Oh, wow. Somebody had asked me that recently, hundreds now, and I don't have an exact number. We have some shows that we have never even posted yet, and some that, I'm not sure if they fit completely within my genre. So, but hundreds and hundreds.
And you actually do a show, you post a show up every week, correct?
Yes, every week on iTunes.
Okay. Well, we're going to go into our break. If we can talk when we come back about the victim mode and the healing mode, that will be ideal. For our listeners that are out there, stay tuned. We're going to talk some more with Angela Schaefers. Remember that you can send an email to simplesteps@me.com or call us at 248-809-3474. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Do you get tired of styling your hair every day? And do you want a good hairstyle every day? Hi, I'm Sarah Schuster. I went on a website called inventnow.org, and after that, I decided to invent something too. Something called the Insta-Do. Just imagine, you just put it over your head like a helmet does, and you pick your hairstyle with the buttons on the side. And you can have instant hairstyle in seconds. People like it. People like Jeff Bart.
I like it.
And people like Kenneth.
It's this helmet thing, and it fits over your head, and it's great.
Thank you, Kenneth. You should go to inventnow.org, and it could help you come up with your own invention. After all, look at me on the radio now.
Anything's possible. Keep thinking. Get started on your own inventions, or just play some games at inventnow.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the National Inventors Hall of Fame Foundation, and the Ad Council.
African American community to the hidden issue of mental health problems.
It showed up in my life through one of my best friends. And we've been friends for over 30 years.
Share your story.
If we would have known earlier, we would have been much more supportive with her.
Once I reached out to my sister, it got a little better. Once I told my mother, it got a little better. The more I talked about it, I felt it coming off.
The healing is in me, and the healing in a journey can also be extended to others.
It's our community and our mental health.
Giving voice to what you're feeling is part of the healing.
If you're strong enough to just open your mouth, that's all it takes.
And the most revolutionary and healing thing that Black people can do right now is to love one another.
It's time to share ourselves. Healing starts with us. Search online for stories that heal. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services,
Have you ever
the Ad
lost
Council,
a cat?
and the Stay Strong
And have
Foundation.
you ever wanted to get your cat back after you lost it? Hi there, I'm Andrew Hoffman. I went on this website called inventnow.org. Then I decided to make an invention of my own. It's called the Lost Cat Magnet Invention. So you can get your cat back after you lost it. Just turn it on, and lost cats stick to it. That's a good cat. If your cat was hiding up in a tree, it won't be up a tree anymore. It will be stuck to the lost cat magnet. And sometimes they fly toward you in the air. Just listen to one satisfied cat. See, that's proof. You should go to the inventnow.org website too. But just remember one thing. Don't do a lost cat magnet.
Anything's possible. Keep thinking. Get started on your own inventions, or just play some games at inventnow.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the National Inventors Hall of Fame Foundation, and the Ad Council.
And now back to Simple Steps, Real Change with Cheryl Maloney and Kenny Brixey on Empower Radio.
Hi, welcome back. Just want to remind everybody before we get started again that we do have a call-in number that you can call with questions for either Angela, Cheryl, or myself. That number is 248-809-3474. Again, that's 248-809-3474. Or if you would rather, you can email a question to any of us at simplesteps@me.com. That's simplesteps@me.com. Angela, before we left, Cheryl had mentioned something about the victim mode as opposed to the healing mode. There is quite a difference. Can you tell our listeners what that difference is?
I would love to, and I think that's a great point to bring up. One thing I want to share is that, in my past, my original story, my childhood and early adult life, I went through a lot of trauma. Child abuse, suffering a traumatic injury at the age of 3 and going through several surgeries. I lost my first spouse to death early on. So there were a lot of things that were built up within me that created anxiety and fear and not always a great attitude because I often felt sorry for myself. And to me, that's being called the victim. So if you live in victim mode, you kind of stay there. You stay stuck in that part of your story that's really sad and traumatic, and it happened, but you can't change it. You can't go back and undo any of it. It's already happened. So I went through a lot of healing process myself. I went through counseling. I read plenty of books. I meditated. I did so many things over time that helped me to understand that though these things happened to me, some of them out of my control and some of them by my own choices because I had grown up, in a dysfunctional home, I could let go of that, learn from it, and move on. And that's a choice that we all have. So the difference between playing the victim and being the victor, if you want to put it that way, and thriving, is that you learn from those things that were painful and upsetting and hurtful, and you get the wisdom from that. You figure out what it meant to you, what it taught you, what it showed you, and you learn about forgiveness, and you learn about moving on, and you learn about how to be the best you there is going forward instead of being stuck in that place of always walking around saying, well, I was, a victim of abuse, or I was a victim of this or that, and even now I don't allow the cancer status, if you will, to put me in victim mode. I don't accept self-pity. I don't want pity from others. I want to learn from it and keep growing in it and share whatever I can to inspire and encourage other people that have to face it.
Well, I've got to tell you, Angela, you and my husband would probably get along really well. He was diagnosed with cancer a little over a year ago. And while I went into how do I fix this mode, because that was my normal, his idea was 99% of my body is healthy. I'm going to focus on that. Right. Because why? It doesn't do me any good to focus on the cancer. Let me focus on this. Now, he did not have stage 4 cancer, but I've got to tell you, I've learned so much from that, and I think that your own story is such an inspiration because you've been and continue to go through something you're going, that's not what my life's about. I'm not the cancer story. I'm the story about giving people hope because they can tell their stories. I've worked so much over the course of years in even simple things within a job where people felt that they couldn't do anything. They were the victim of what someone else did, but it's all about how you perceive it and what your mental attitude is, not the situation.
That's right. That's completely true. And I think that that's, along my journey as I was healing and understanding that I had a choice and I didn't have to be the victim, I started to recognize how other people were living out their victimhood. And then I started to say, that's not how I want to be. I don't want to be depressed and discouraged and discouraging. I want to be encouraging and inspiring. And so it was a process to watch how different people dealt with it. And then, of course, I started putting myself around other people who were surviving and thriving, whatever it was. And that encouraged and inspired me, kind of like how the show does, to say, okay, here's the things I can do with this. This is what I learned from it. This is who I am, though I went through that. And I'm going to turn that around and do something good with it. And I think we talked earlier about how healing that was for me as part of my healing process was realizing that everything I had gone through, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the traumatic stuff, was all for a purpose. And when I learned what that purpose was to encourage and inspire other people, I really felt a sense of, okay, I understand now. It's not that I wished it had all been this way, but I wouldn't trade it for anything because it made me who I am.
Well, and, we have Pam Thomas. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Pam or not. We've had her on the show a couple of times, and she has gone through a long history of mental abuse in her family as a child. And she keeps saying, that's not what I'm about. I appreciate the fact, and this was with her parents, and her attitude is, I love my parents, and I went through that, and I learned something, so I give them thanks. Yes. Because of them, I'm the person that I am now, and that's exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
We wouldn't wish it on our worst enemies, but we have gone through it. We've survived it. Now we're thriving it. So I've got to ask you a question. Was there ever a time that you were in victim mode in the early stages?
As far as the cancer goes, or
anything that you've gone through?
Yeah, definitely. In my young adult life, I was definitely in the victim mode, and I blamed everybody and everything for all the things that had happened. The key was in recognizing that there were some things that happened to me, including since childhood, that I had absolutely no control over. Right. And there were some things that I made decisions about because all I knew was dysfunction. All I knew was how to not love someone right, or to show respect, or to show tenderness. So I made decisions and took action accordingly. And so that's where I had to draw the line and say, what part of my story is my responsibility and things that I need to learn about and change within myself? And what part are things that happened to me because of whoever or whatever? And then I had to take that stuff and be able to forgive my parents, for instance, or other people that hurt me, and to understand that they treated me the way that they were probably treated, or based on what they knew. So it's very powerful when you're able to get to that place of not only forgiveness for others, but forgiveness for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, what is your recommendation? Because I think that we run into a lot of people that are stuck in victim mode. What's your recommendation or your advice for them on, they find themselves there, but they don't know how to pull out of it? What would you suggest they start with?
Well, being a counselor, I have to always say that counseling is a great way to go. Of course, you have to find the right counselor for you, or the right setting. Sometimes group counseling is awesome because you can talk, like we mentioned earlier, with other people who really have gone through what you've gone through. Maybe you've gone through abuse or neglect or whatever, domestic violence, and it's healthy and good to talk with others and learn how they endured that and got through that. Reading self-help books. There's so many amazing books out there, not just people sharing their story, but people talking about how do you change that mindset. Because what happens when you go through a lot of trauma and turmoil, especially in your early life, you develop habits based on that. So a lot of counseling is a lot of breaking the old habits and starting up new ones. And you kind of talk about this in your own book. Simple Steps to Real Life Change is about changing those habits of waking up every day and feeling negative or feeling discouraged. So where do you find inspiration? How do you make yourself be more positive or speak in a more positive fashion? Those types of things. There's a lot of ways. And one thing I try and explain to people is I don't think, so far as I know, that there's one clear way, but there's a different way for everyone, because everyone's situation and how they take in information and implement it is different.
Angela, I know that there's kind of a, still even today, there's kind of a stigma about counseling. It's like, once I set foot in that door, I'm going to be there the rest of my life. I'm going to have to go dig. Tell what is the truth about counseling for those that are listening that might think that?
Well, the truth is sometimes those are situations that do occur, because depending on the person and the counselor, I guess, you can be there for years. And it really is about you having to face your stuff and being willing to be brave enough to go through the healing process. The healing process is not easy by any means. And I do liken it in some ways to people who've had to learn to walk again, or people who've had to learn to function without a particular limb because they lost it in an accident or because of illness. It's painful. It's difficult. It's challenging. It's not what we're used to. And even though what you can get to will be better, it's not always easy and quick to get to that, over the rainbow, if you will, to the other side of living a better life. So I think that counseling is doable and possible. But the first thing I try and tell people, especially ones that I work with, is that you have to be the one ready, willing, and able to go through this process. And whether it's through counseling and reading, or just reading, or whatever workshops, anything you do, if you're not really, really willing and able to walk through the exercises and the steps, nothing will change. You could be there for years. You could stay in victim mode forever.
Exactly.
And that's not what we want. We want to, that's, part of the premise of Your Story Matters. We want to tell people, look, here's some people who have gone through stuff. They understand. They've been there. They've been discouraged. They've been hopeless. But something changed for them, and these are some tips that they have to share about how they got through their situation.
Well, and I think that's really important in a couple of ways. And the first that came to mind as you were talking was people have to be ready. Because what I've found, especially with what Kenny and I are doing here, is somebody's told them they have to do something.
Yes.
You know, they have to change, whether it's they have to lose weight or they have to get out of their funk or whatever the case may be. Until they're ready to make the change, it's not going to stick with them.
That's right.
They have to want to make that change. And then once they get there, being around people that have gone through, or at least hearing, as Your Story Matters shares, you know, when they hear these stories of, okay, this person came out of childhood abuse, or they're dealing with, you know, chronic pain syndrome, or they're dealing with something that has changed their lives, okay, we can handle that.
Right,
you know,
right.
I call it one simple step at a time, but then again, you know, that would be my way of doing it.
And I think it's a great point that you bring up, because one of the things that I've noticed in counseling and just in life in general are people that are told or forced to, if you will, to get over grief.
Ugh.
And grief is one of those things, much like the grief you have when you find out that you have a life-threatening illness or you lose a limb, that there's no time frame on it. There's no way for you and I to be at the same spot in the same way at the same time to be able to say, okay, we're going to heal now. We're going to start working on this. And that's a human condition. So all of that has to do with your own circumstances, your own heart, everything that, you know, you've been taught and told and gone through from, you know, the beginning to now. So that's where I really try and encourage people to give one another grace and to give themselves some grace and find that balance. Is it time for me to do a little bit more, to work a little bit harder, to get some counseling or read this book? Or am I not ready to receive that and go down that path? Because that is really something important to realize. We don't want to go to the healing process and continue to fail and not go anywhere and then feel like this isn't going to work.
Well, and then you add on top of it, okay, now I failed. I wasn't ready to do this, but I failed at this, so now I feel even worse about myself. But Angela, I think that the whole comment about grief, and we all grieve differently, because I said all along, don't let anyone tell you it's time to get over it, because you're different. We don't walk in each other's shoes. We haven't lived the same life. I mean, I look at, for example, my father died suddenly, leaving me as the primary caregiver for my mother. Well, okay, there's a little difference between her grieving of losing her husband after 58 years and mine. Now I have to go into action mode. So we deal with it differently. We all deal with it differently. And that's okay. We cannot judge someone else's grief. Okay, it doesn't do any good to judge somebody else's grief.
I think what I'm hearing here, and we'll see if you agree, Angela, is that the key is just being aware of where you are. No judgment, just be aware. And and when you're ready, then you can make your steps.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of what's really neat about reading a book such as Simple Steps, Real Change, or hearing a show or hearing a speaker, things like that, because I think what happens is that when we're supposed to hear something or pick up that book, it happens for us at the right time for us. It might leave a seed within us, and later on, maybe even a year or two later, we go back to something and then we start our healing process. It might be so powerful that the next day we start working on whatever. So that's critical for people to understand, is that just be aware, as you mentioned, and it's amazing what will fall into your lap. You'll hear the message that you need to hear. You'll find an avenue, if you will, just when you need it.
Well, and it's that synchronicity. I know it, you know, Kenny and I will post on our page, and invariably there's a half a dozen people that go, you must have been in my mind. I needed to hear that right now. So I've got to ask you a question, Angela. What was it that you heard that moved you out of where you were to in this, I've got a purpose, let's move forward? What triggered that for you?
Well, as I said, I went through a lot of healing and working on my own stuff, especially from my childhood early on in my early adult life. But one thing that was very powerful for me was about a year after I was diagnosed. And that first year I did spend in victim mode as far as feeling sorry for myself, being terrified of dying and leaving my kids behind. And I was quite suicidal. I felt like, why not end this now? I can't wait for the day to come because I didn't know what day it would be. But I woke up about a year later and I thought, I'm still here. So if I'm still here, they must be wrong or there must be a reason. And I'm going to choose right now to start living my life like I'm living and live each day the best that I can, because I won't know. And none of us really know anyway when our time is up and when we're going to heaven. And so that was a profound moment for me to let go of a lot of that fear that was hanging over me and just really focus on today.
Wow. How have your kids taken this? I mean, your children, you said 2 of them are older and on their own, and then you've got a younger child. How have they dealt with this?
It's been fairly difficult for them over the years, but as they've gotten older, my son's only 13, but my 2 daughters are in their 20s, they have been able to deal with their feelings, and we've been able to talk about it as a family and make plans if necessary or whenever necessary. And it's been quite healing and effective for us as a family unit. And one thing that's been awesome is that with my daughters, the 2 older ones, we've been able to talk about what they're learning from this, from seeing this happen with me and in our family, and the fear and challenges they've dealt with if I'm sick one time or something like that, or when another tumor came up. So it's been really amazing to see that. And I just continue to encourage them to take this, whatever happens down the road, and share that learning with other people, to encourage and inspire them that they too can get through a challenging diagnosis with family or death, whatever it is. And that's just amazing to me that it can be like that, and that I'm blessed with these kids who get it, who want to know, what do I do with this, Mom? How do I handle this? And so we talk about it and we learn together over time as far as how we're going to deal with this in our family.
Yeah, that's just, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, you must be an incredible inspiration to your children.
Well, thank you. They say I am, but that might be because they're telling me that around Christmas time. No, I'm just kidding. No, we're very, very close. I really am blessed because we have an amazing, amazing relationship. I have really put forth effort, as have they, to be close and be connected and be honest about, health stuff and things like that. So it's pretty awesome that I could say right now, if this was it for me, I'm satisfied that I've done the best that I can do. And I'm trying to, as I said, leave a legacy behind of encouraging and inspiring others to share their story. And then, more importantly, is to encourage my own children.
You just brought up a wonderful point that I never would have thought of. Well, not until I ran into it face to face, but the children and the family members all have their own story as well based on what you're going through. So it's like, you have to have story time in your house to create what you have.
Yes, it's amazing what you can learn from seeing their stories separate as yours. And that was something, even in counseling, I've talked with other parents, and, we can't change or control our kids' stories. It's part of their life. It's part of what they're supposed to go through and learn from. And that's not always easy to do as a parent. Of course, you don't want them to suffer or feel bad about anything. But when you can teach them to learn from that and grow in that, I think that's really the key to giving them a gift.
That's powerful. Yeah.
Wow. And it ripples and it ripples and it ripples because you're leaving a legacy for your children, and that legacy goes on to their children and literally everyone that they interact with, because they have this resilience because they have lived with what you're going through and developed their own stories. And I've not had children, but I sit here and I see this and I go, what a legacy you have left for your children and your grandchildren. Mm-hmm. Okay, do you have grandchildren yet?
I do. I have a beautiful granddaughter who's 9, which is a whole nother story that I wish we had time for. But when I was diagnosed, she was literally born 2 weeks after my second surgery, and I was in the delivery room with my daughter cutting the cord. So it was pretty amazing that I thought I would not have the opportunity to be a grandmother. And here I am 9 years later with my precious granddaughter, and just have had amazing, amazing love happen there. So it's been a blessing.
Does she understand what you're going through?
She does to some degree. She just talks about being sad about that and not wanting me to go anywhere. And she's one of my biggest advocates. She tells everybody, just go to yourstorymatters.net. So she's pretty awesome in that respect, because she'll share about, that I've written my story and that I'm writing another book. And so it's just amazing that she's so supportive of me.
Well, that's cool. Well, since you brought that up, talk a little bit about what's your next book about?
It is called Your Story Matters, You Matter, a guide to healing, learning from, and sharing your story. And basically, it's an interactive type of book where you can answer open-ended questions about some of your history, your background, your story, some of the feelings that came up, some of the things you learned about yourself, about life, and how to shape that into sharing your story, whether writing it, sharing it with your family, making a video, and the importance of how powerful that can be to encourage and inspire other people.
Wow. Well, you probably have a lot of people asking you, how do I tell my story?
Yes, I do. And that's why I decided to put the book together and hopefully give it to people as a launching pad to put their thoughts, together and kind of sort out, because, our stories are huge. There's not just one thing, but I try and shape within the book a way for them to pull out the message in it.
Wonderful. Well, what's next on the horizon? You've got this book coming out. What else is on your plans?
Just to continue doing what I'm doing, sharing stories that'll change the world and encourage and inspire people.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, tell us about a couple of your guests that are coming up so we can share that with our audience.
Well, we have some guests coming up that will be sharing about their own books, about how they've been empowered in business. Another person who went through a traumatic second divorce and had to re-look at his whole life and discover some keys to relationship and how to love and have healthy love. So different things like that.
Well, interesting. You just made a comment, and I wondered, of all these folks that you talk to, are most of the people you deal with women?
No, there's men and women. I wouldn't say there's more of either one. So there's been plenty of men on there who have shared some of their journey and written different books or have different tips and techniques that they're sharing to help make the world a better place. A couple of athletes, as I mentioned, the 3-time amputee that finished the Ironman 2 years ago was the first 3-time amputee to do so. He's amazing. And he shared his story and talks about how he gets through daily life without all of his limbs and encourages and inspires other people to move on from that circumstance and be the best that you can be.
Of all these stories that you've listened to, has there been one that just has stuck with you because it's moved you so much?
Oh, that's a hard one. I get asked that, and I never know what to say. I would have to say probably another lady who is armless. Her book is Unarmed and Dangerous. And she's, again, taken her circumstance and ran with it. She's an inspirational speaker. She's written a wonderful book. And she just won't let the circumstances of her life, the challenges of her childhood, which was pretty hard because she was teased a lot and not included in the regular group, affect how she's going to be the victor, not the victim. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge one for me. I really appreciated her being so courageous in sharing her story. And she was just so humble in everything that she said and sharing so diligently how painful it was, but how she made that choice to not let that keep her back.
Well, and don't you find people that are going through that, they are more humbled and they see themselves as not being courageous. They see themselves as just living their lives. And it's those of us around us that see their courage.
Yes, absolutely. And that's some of the ripple effect, because then they're encouraged more to do what they're doing and to change lives.
Oh, Angela, how wonderful. Well, as you can tell, this hour has flown by, and we really appreciate you being here to talk about your story and how other people's stories matter and how we can all learn from them. So I hope you will think about coming back and joining us again and sharing some more stories.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and Kenny this evening, and I had a great time chatting.
Wonderful. Well, if people want to read through some of your stories, will you give them your website? YourStoryMatters.net. Wonderful. And your book is due out when?
It should be available in about 6 weeks, and you can find the link on the website. And, of course, we'll be promoting it through Facebook and Twitter, where you can also find Your Story Matters.
Fabulous. Well, Angela, thank you very much. And everyone, thanks for listening. Next week on our show, we are going to have Dr. Julie Krull joining us. Dr. Julie on Your Beautiful Mind. So we'll see you next week. Have a great week.